What makes a movie unfilmable? Plenty of stories have been given that descriptor over the years. Books that can't be translated to screen. For a long time, Dune was considered unfilmable. People were still saying that up until Denis Villeneuve's 2021 adaptation, even though there were several that came before. David Lynch was the first to succeed, if you want to call it that, back in '84, but he was not the first to attempt to film the unfilmable, and I'd like to go over those attempts. Let's do this. Alright, Internet, so the first attempt at adapting Dune goes all the way back to the late 60s, early 70s depending on where you look. I think it's worth noting that Dune came out in 1965, so the push to bring it to screen has always been built into it in some form. The attempt was spearheaded by producer Arthur P. Jacobs. He picked up the rights not long after doing the '68 Planet of the Apes, so clearly he knows how to do ambitious sci-fi concepts. Though I will say Apes did stand in his way, as work on the sequels is what delayed the project. If I was a betting man, which I am not, I feel like to keep the budget in check, they would have had to have focused the story almost exclusively on Arrakis. Having only one major location to build most of the sets on feels right, and it isn't that big a stretch on the story. But hey, that's just a theory. Film theory. David Lean was the production's original choice to direct, and it feels like a really fun idea. While he never made genre films in his career, he had made several war films, and a good chunk of his filmography is what would be called epics. So I think he would have done something really interesting here, especially for the time. After going through delays and attempts to find a director, eventually the rights to the adaptation were sold by APJ to a French consortium, with Alejandro Jodorowsky set to direct. But before we get into that, let's talk about the idea of something being unadaptable. There have been a lot of books over the years that have been deemed unable to be filmed. Unadaptable. That's the label we're talking here. Some got that because of the nature of the narrative, like Gravity Rainbow, written by reclusive author Thomas Pynchon.
Hey, over here! Have your picture taken with a reclusive author. Today only, we'll throw in a free autograph.
Gravity's Rainbow is a sprawling narrative in its scope, but also takes deviations. Part of what makes it such an impressive read is how, with all of these deviations, it never feels like it's meandering, with Pynchon's prose executing the structure with surgical accuracy. At least that's what I've heard. I'm too scared to read it. The point I'm making here is that this kind of unfilmable gets that label from how massive that scope is. It is too much for a traditional film. Something like Dune got called unfilmable because when it came out, it seemed like an impossible world to realize with existing technology. Even after something like Star Wars, a film that itself took inspiration from Dune, it felt impossible. A lot of people say that Lynch's Dune, a movie we will get to, proved the point as not having done the source material justice. But time and technology moves on. Other, similarly unfilmable adaptations like The Lord of the Rings prove the potential, and suddenly unfilmable genre work becomes a lot more possible. So, with all of that, I hope you understand the next point I have to make. Jodorowsky's Dune is unfilmable. If you are unfamiliar, there is a documentary called Jodorowsky's Dune, where Alejandro goes into the details of the work he did and the vision he had for his adaptation of Dune. He goes into the details of collaborating with the pre-Alien H.R. Giger on some of the concept art, with Salvador Dali and Orson Welles and Mick Jagger among the attached cast. All of these ideas, along with the gorgeous art by Giger and Mobius, as well as the passion and excitement he has when talking about it, has given this failed adaptation a cult following, and is considered to be one of the great unmade films. That said, it never could have been made. The deal he made with some of the cast would have hemorrhaged money, and the changes that he made would have made a 14-hour film that honestly wouldn't have been Dune. Also, obviously, nobody would release a 14-hour film. I mean, long cinema does exist. There is a documentary called The Journey by Peter Watkins that is over 14 hours, but examples like this are exceptions to the rule, not the rule itself. I cannot see a world where this 14-hour kaleidoscopic reinterpretation of Dune would have been able to make its money back. The project was budgeted at $15 million of that time money and stalled out because some of that didn't come in, and there was no way the production Alejandro had planned would not have ballooned out of control. 15 million is chump change for something like this. The idea of Jodorowsky's Dune is a pipe dream, but that documentary is fantastic, honestly. I can't recommend it enough, even though I do dismiss it as impossible. The doc is a showcase of the pure excitement and passion of following creative inspiration. It's beautiful in its own way, and is honestly, in my opinion, better than the film he could have made. It is also worth noting that a lot of the ideas from this adaptation got made into the graphic novel The Inkle, so after you check out the documentary, check that out too. I haven't seen it yet, but it is on my to-do list, so if you want to send me a copy, my home address is After the failure to launch of Jodorowsky's adaptation, the rights to Dune got picked up by Dino De Laurentiis, a producer probably most well known for working on the Hannibal films that aren't Silence of the Lambs, but does include Manhunter, the Red Dragon adaptation by Michael Mann starring Logan Roy. De Laurentiis attached Ridley Scott to direct, who was just coming off of Alien, where he worked with Dan O'Bannon and Giger, I really should have looked up how to pronounce his name before filming this. It's going to be multiple ways in this video. He worked with both of them, who were attached to the previous Dune adaptation at some point. Scott was a smart choice, having just done a smaller scale sci-fi, so having him step up in scale makes sense. On top of that, both Alien and his first film, The Duelist, two projects that have no accounts of going over budget or having production go long. It just makes sense attaching him to that. That's the dream choice for a producer. Scott eventually did drop out, not wanting to commit to the several years he thought it would take to get it done. He moved on and directed Blade Runner instead, a movie that came out in 1982, but whose final cut did not get released until 2007. So, a much smaller time commitment. In the 1980s, with the rights to Dune getting closer to expiration, Dino was finally able to attach the young ingenue director of The Elephant Man, David Lynch, who I gleefully said I was going to talk more about on this channel back in 2022. I finally got there. You can't say I'm not a man of my word. I don't think this video counts to the spirit of what that video was saying, though. David Lynch's Dune has a bit of a reputation, to say the least. Kevin Mayer, writing for The Times UK, has said,
"The convoluted narrative ultimately slips away from Lynch, and in that failure lives the suspicion that Frank Herbert's novel is beyond adaptation."
And film historian John Clute has said that the movie,
unfortunately, perhaps inevitably, reduced Herbert's dense text to a melodrama.
It is also famously known at this point that Lynch sort of lost a lot of creative control in the editing process. His assembly cut was 4 hours, and he planned on trimming it down to a manageable 3, but was forced to cut it down to 137 minutes instead. This really soured his experience with the film to the point where he still doesn't like talking about it in interviews and has turned down the chance to do a director's cut multiple times. Now, this is all just historical information at this point, and I know you're asking, Greg, what are your opinions on this movie? Thank you for asking, past me writing this. I had avoided this movie for a long time, both as a fan of science fiction and Lynch, because I had heard a lot of bad things. Like, I had been directly told not to watch this. So now that I've seen it, I can see why it has a cult following. The production design is gorgeous. Cinematography too. There is so much beauty in the visuals of this film. And you can definitely pick out some of the David Lynchisms in here as well. Especially his unique sense of humor. He lets things get weird. He put dogs all over this movie, never addressing it. You can really tell his favorite parts were the Harkonnen scenes because they have so much energy. The Navigator's Guild too, that stuff is wicked. The movie is just S tier when it comes to little freaks, but it's not all great, I'm not going to ignore its faults. My main issue with it, I'm going to say, is the pacing. So many scenes are just long, mostly monotone conversations, making them feel like they are dragging on longer than they are. But at the same time, there are so many other moments that felt rushed, making them feel inconsequential. Like, I don't care about Duncan in this at all. The film also has the problem of laying out moments like the Duke's poison tooth or the Emperor's plan to betray House Atreides way before they happen. And it's not done in a way that will build tension as we wait for the moment. It's not that Hitchcock bomb under the table stuff. We are just told what's going to happen, then however many scenes that felt a lot longer than they were later, it happens. Overall, there is stuff to enjoy, but stuff that also disappoints. I don't regret watching it at all, but I don't see myself returning to it anytime soon. But that being said, I do need to pad the runtime of this video, so coming up next is my top 50. With that, we are done. The history of Dune making its way to the big screen. Not the best end result, but thankfully we got a new version. In between theatrical Dune adaptations, we did get to spend some time with it on the small screen as well, and I am absolutely going to be covering that stuff in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and comment, and if you want to keep up with me, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps out the channel and my ego, and until next time, have a good one.